Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest storms. When Sarah Martinez clocked in for her night shift at St. Mary's General Hospital, she thought she'd face another routine evening of checking vitals and administering medications. She had no idea that saving one man's life would put her at the center of a national security crisis that would shake the very foundations of military intelligence. What happens when a brand new nurse becomes the only witness to an assassination attempt on one of America's most classified military leaders? What happens when the people who are supposed to protect you become the very ones you need protection from? This is the true story of how one woman's courage in the face of impossible odds exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government, and how a simple act of medical care became a race against time to prevent a catastrophe that could have changed the course of American history forever. The truth, as Sarah would soon discover, is far more dangerous than any lie. Sarah Martinez adjusted her stethoscope around her neck as she walked through the automatic doors of St. Mary's General Hospital. The cool October air followed her inside, mixing with the familiar smell of disinfectant and floor wax that had become her second home over the past 3 months. At 24, she was still getting used to the weight of responsibility that came with being a registered nurse, especially during the night shift when the hospital felt like a different world entirely. The emergency department was unusually quiet for a Thursday evening. Most nights brought a steady stream of cases ranging from heart attacks to car accidents, but tonight felt different. Sarah checked her watch as she approached the nurse's station where her supervisor, Helen Rodriguez, was reviewing patient charts with the intensity of someone who had seen 30 years of medical emergencies. "Anything I should know about before I start my rounds?" Sarah asked, tying her dark hair back into a ponytail. She had learned early in nursing school that loose hair was not just unprofessional, but could be dangerous in emergency situations. Helen looked up from her clipboard, her weathered face showing the kind of exhaustion that came from too many double shifts. "Room 7 has an elderly gentleman with chest pains, admitted an hour ago. Room 12 is a construction worker with a possible concussion. Nothing too complicated tonight, which makes me nervous. You know what they say about the calm before the storm?" Sarah nodded, understanding the superstition that many medical professionals shared. Quiet nights often turn chaotic without warning. She took the patient files Helen handed her and began her initial review. The elderly gentleman in room 7 was Thomas Wilson, 73 years old, experiencing irregular heartbeat and shortness of breath. Standard procedure would be to monitor his vital signs every 30 minutes and ensure he was comfortable while waiting for the cardiologist to arrive in the morning. As Sarah made her way down the dimly lit hallway, her soft-soled shoes squeaking slightly against the polished linoleum floor, she noticed how peaceful the hospital seemed. Most patients were sleeping, and the usual sounds of medical equipment hummed quietly in the background. She had always found something oddly comforting about the night shift, despite its challenges. There was a sense of being the guardian of people's most vulnerable moments, standing watch while the rest of the world slept. Room 7 was at the end of the corridor, and as Sarah approached, she could hear labored breathing coming from inside. She knocked gently before entering, not wanting to startle her patient if he was awake. The room was dark except for the soft glow of monitoring equipment and the light filtering in from the hallway. "Mr. Wilson?" she called softly as she stepped inside. "I'm Sarah, your night nurse. How are you feeling?" The man lying in the hospital bed turned his head toward her voice, and even in the dim light, Sarah could see something was seriously wrong. His breathing was extremely labored, much worse than what was described in his chart. His skin had a grayish pallor that immediately set off alarm bells in her mind. This was not simple chest pain or irregular heartbeat. This looked like someone in the advanced stages of cardiac distress. "Can't breathe," the man whispered, his voice barely audible above the sound of the heart monitor, which Sarah now noticed was beeping more rapidly than normal. Sarah immediately moved to his bedside and began checking his vital signs manually while observing his condition. His pulse was weak and irregular, his blood pressure was dangerously low, and his oxygen saturation levels were dropping rapidly. Whatever was happening, it was happening fast, and it was serious. "Mr. Wilson, I need you to try to stay calm while I check a few things," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady and professional even as her mind raced through possible causes and treatments. She had seen enough cardiac emergencies during her training to know that this man was in immediate danger. As she adjusted the oxygen mask over his face and increased the flow rate, Sarah noticed something odd about her patient. Despite being listed as Thomas Wilson, age 73, the man lying before her seemed to have the physical build of someone much younger. His hands, while weathered, showed calluses and scars that suggested a life of physical activity rather than the soft hands of a typical elderly civilian. His arms, visible beneath the hospital gown, showed muscle tone that was unusual for someone his supposed age. "Sir, I need to ask you some questions about your medical history," Sarah said as she prepared to take another blood pressure reading. "Are you currently taking any medications? Do you have any allergies I should know about?" The man's eyes, which had been struggling to focus, suddenly sharpened and locked onto hers with an intensity that made her pause. For a moment, the labored breathing seemed less urgent than the look he was giving her. It was the look of someone who was used to being in command, someone accustomed to making life and death decisions. "No medications," he whispered, his voice slightly stronger now with the increased oxygen. "No allergies. Listen carefully, nurse. This is not what it seems." Sarah frowned, unsure what he meant. Medical emergencies often cause confusion and disorientation, especially in elderly patients. She decided to focus on the immediate medical crisis rather than trying to understand cryptic statements that might be the result of oxygen deprivation to the brain. "Mr. Wilson, I need to call the attending physician. Your condition appears to be more serious than initially diagnosed," Sarah explained as she reached for the call button. "Wait," the man said with surprising firmness for someone who appeared to be having a heart attack. "Before you call anyone, I need you to look at this." With considerable effort, he raised his right hand and pulled aside the hospital gown near his shoulder. Sarah leaned closer to see what he was trying to show her, expecting perhaps a medical alert tattoo or surgical scar that might explain his condition. What she saw instead made her step back in shock. Tattooed on his shoulder, partially hidden by what looked like a fresh bandage that had been hastily applied, was an intricate military insignia unlike anything she had ever seen. It was not the standard eagle, anchor, and trident of the Navy SEALs that most people would recognize from movies and television. This was something more complex, with additional elements that suggested a level of classification far beyond standard military units. "I am Admiral James Mitchell," the man whispered, his breathing becoming more labored again. "United States Navy SEALs, Special Operations Command. What you see in my chart is a cover identity. I'm not supposed to be here." Sarah's mind reeled as she tried to process this information. If this man was telling the truth, then nothing about this situation was what it appeared to be. A high-ranking military officer using a false identity in a civilian hospital could only mean one thing. Something had gone seriously wrong, and he was hiding from someone or something dangerous. "Sir, regardless of who you are, you need immediate medical attention," Sarah said, falling back on her medical training while her mind tried to make sense of the situation. "Your heart rate is becoming increasingly irregular, and your oxygen levels are still dropping." Admiral Mitchell, if that was indeed his real name, grabbed her wrist with surprising strength for someone in cardiac distress. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice urgent despite his breathing difficulties. "I was not supposed to be injured. I was not supposed to be brought to this hospital. There are people looking for me, and if they find me here, both of our lives are in danger." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Nothing in her nursing training had prepared her for a situation like this. She was trained to save lives and provide medical care, not to deal with what sounded like a military or intelligence operation gone wrong. "What happened to you?" she asked, keeping her voice low while checking his vital signs again. His condition was continuing to deteriorate, but the urgency in his voice suggested that calling for immediate help might not be the right course of action. "Ambush," Mitchell whispered. "My team and I were conducting a classified operation. Someone leaked our position. 3 of my men are dead." I only escaped because I was thrown clear when our vehicle exploded. I managed to make it to a safe house, but I was more injured than I realized. Sarah examined him more carefully now, looking for signs of trauma beyond the cardiac distress. She found them quickly, bruising along his ribs that suggested possible internal injuries, cuts, and abrasions that had been hastily bandaged, and what looked like shrapnel wounds on his arms and legs. This was not an elderly man having a heart attack. This was a severely injured military operative whose body was shutting down from trauma and blood loss. "You need surgery," Sarah said firmly. "These injuries are beyond what I can treat with basic nursing care. You could have internal bleeding, and your heart is struggling to compensate for blood loss." "No surgeons," Mitchell said, his grip on her wrist tightening. "No doctors who aren't absolutely necessary. The fewer people who know I'm here, the better. Can you stabilize me with what you have available?" Sarah considered the request. She had advanced training in trauma care, and the hospital's emergency supplies would allow her to provide more comprehensive treatment than basic nursing care. But stabilizing someone with these kinds of injuries without proper surgical intervention was risky at best. "I can try," she said finally, "but I need you to understand that this is extremely dangerous. Without proper surgery, you could die from internal bleeding or go into cardiac arrest." "I understand the risks," Mitchell replied. "But if the wrong people find me here, we'll both die anyway. At least this way, we have a chance." Sarah made a decision that would change the course of her life forever. Instead of following standard hospital protocol and calling for immediate assistance, she decided to trust this mysterious patient and attempt to stabilize him using her own skills and the medical supplies available in the emergency department. She began by establishing a more secure foreline and administering fluids to help stabilize his blood pressure. Next, she carefully examined his wounds, cleaning and rebandaging them with proper medical supplies rather than the makeshift dressings he had apparently applied himself. The shrapnel wounds were deep, but had missed major arteries, which explained how he had survived this long without bleeding out. As she worked, Mitchell's breathing began to stabilize slightly, and his heart rate became more regular. The combination of proper wound care, fluids, and increased oxygen was helping his body begin to recover from the trauma. "Better?" Sarah asked as she finished cleaning a particularly nasty cut on his left arm. "Much better," Mitchell replied, and for the first time since she had entered the room, he seemed fully alert and focused. "You have good hands, nurse. You may have just saved my life." "We're not out of danger yet," Sarah warned. "Your injuries are serious, and you still need proper medical care. How long can you stay hidden here before someone comes looking for you?" Before Mitchell could answer, they both heard the sound of multiple vehicles pulling into the hospital's emergency entrance. The sound was distinct, heavy vehicles moving fast, followed by the slam of doors and the sound of multiple footsteps approaching the hospital entrance. Mitchell's eyes widened in alarm. "They found me," he whispered. "Get down and stay quiet. Whatever happens next, do not let them know you were treating me." Sarah's heart began racing as she heard the footsteps entering the emergency department. Multiple voices were speaking in low, urgent tones, and she could hear Helen at the nurse's station asking how she could help the unexpected visitors. Through the partially open door of room 7, Sarah could see men in dark suits moving through the emergency department with the kind of purposeful efficiency that suggested law enforcement or military training. They were showing credentials to Helen and asking specific questions about recent admissions. "We're looking for a patient who may have been brought in tonight," one of the men was saying. "Elderly male, possible cardiac event. Maybe using the name Thomas Wilson." Sarah felt her blood run cold. These people, whoever they were, knew exactly who they were looking for and what identity Mitchell was using. This was not a coincidence or a routine check. Someone had specifically directed them to this hospital, to this patient, using the exact cover story that Mitchell was supposed to be using. Mitchell caught her eye and mouthed a single word, "Run." Sarah's mind raced as she crouched beside Admiral Mitchell's bed, listening to the approaching footsteps and muffled conversations in the hallway. The men in suits were getting closer, and their questions were becoming more specific. She could hear Helen's voice, polite, but increasingly nervous as she answered their inquiries about recent admissions and patient locations. "I need you to listen very carefully," Mitchell whispered, his voice barely audible above the quiet hum of medical equipment. "These are not federal agents coming to help. They're the same people who killed my team. If they find me here, they will eliminate both of us to cover their tracks." Sarah felt a surge of panic, but her medical training kicked in, helping her maintain focus despite the terror building in her chest. She had spent months learning to stay calm in emergency situations, and while this was far beyond anything she had ever imagined facing, the principle remained the same. Assess the situation, identify the immediate threats, and take action to preserve life. "How we get out of here?" she whispered back, checking the room for alternative exits. The window faced the parking lot, but they were on the second floor, making escape that way nearly impossible, especially with Mitchell's injuries. "There's a service elevator at the end of the east wing," Mitchell said, wincing as he tried to sit up. "It connects to the basement parking garage. If we can reach it without being seen, we might have a chance." Sarah helped him into a sitting position, noting that while his condition had improved with treatment, he was still far from being mobile enough for a dangerous escape attempt. Moving him in his current state would be risky, but staying put seemed even more dangerous. "Can you walk?" she asked, gathering the 4-bag and portable oxygen tank that would be necessary to keep him stable during any movement. "I'll have to," Mitchell replied grimly. "Help me get into some clothes. Hospital gowns aren't exactly ideal for covert operations." Sarah looked around the room for options. In the small closet, she found the clothes Mitchell had been wearing when he was admitted. They were torn and blood-stained, but they would be better than a hospital gown for moving through the building undetected. As she helped him change, being careful not to disturb his bandages or foreline, she could hear the voices in the hallway getting closer. "Room 5, clear. Room 6, clear." One of the men was reporting to someone, presumably a leader of their group. They were conducting a systematic search of the emergency department, checking every room methodically. "How many of them are there?" Sarah asked as she helped Mitchell into his shirt, which was torn across the back but still wearable. "I counted at least 6 from their voices," Mitchell replied, testing his ability to stand. He was shaky but mobile, though Sarah could see that every movement caused him considerable pain. "They're professionals, probably former military or intelligence operatives. They won't make mistakes, and they won't hesitate to use force." Sarah grabbed a wheelchair from the hallway storage area, moving as quietly as possible. If anyone saw them, it would look like she was transporting a patient for routine testing, which might buy them precious time before anyone realized what was happening. As she helped Mitchell into the wheelchair, covering him with a hospital blanket to hide his street clothes and conceal the portable medical equipment, she heard Helen's voice much closer now. "Room 7 has Mr. Wilson, the cardiac patient I mentioned," Helen was saying, "but he's been stable all evening. Our night nurse Sarah has been monitoring him regularly." Sarah's heart sank. Helen was inadvertently giving their pursuers exactly the information they needed to find them. In moments, these dangerous men would be at their door, and any chance of escape would be lost. "Move," Mitchell whispered urgently. "Now." Sarah pushed the wheelchair toward the door, trying to time their exit to avoid the approaching search team. She cracked the door open slightly and peered into the hallway. 3 men in dark suits were visible, standing with Helen at the nurse's station about 50 feet away. Their backs were turned as they examined patient charts, but one of them was beginning to move toward the patient rooms. "East wing is the opposite direction," Sarah whispered. "We'll have to go past them to reach the service elevator." "Then we create a distraction," Mitchell said quietly. "In 30 seconds, there's going to be a fire alarm in the west wing. When you hear it, push me toward the east wing as fast as you can. Everyone's attention will be focused on the fire alarm." "How can you possibly trigger a fire alarm from here?" Sarah asked, but even as the words left her mouth, Mitchell was doing something with what looked like a small device he had produced from his pocket. "Military technology has its advantages," he said simply. 30 seconds. Sarah positioned herself behind the wheelchair, planning the fastest route to the service elevator. The East Wing was approximately 200 feet from their current location, past the nurse's station, through a connecting corridor, and around two corners. Under normal circumstances, it would be a 3-minute walk. Tonight, it would need to be a 30-second sprint while avoiding detection by trained operatives who were actively hunting them. 20 seconds. Sarah could hear the men asking Helen more detailed questions about Thomas Wilson's condition and which nurse had been assigned to care for him. One of them was asking for her specifically, wanting to speak with her about her patient status. 10 seconds. Sarah took a deep breath, mentally rehearsing the route and preparing to move faster than she had ever moved while pushing a wheelchair. Mitchell adjusted his position slightly, preparing to help as much as his injuries would allow. 5 seconds. The man who had been asking about Sarah was starting to walk toward the patient rooms, and Helen was pointing in their direction. The fire alarm erupted throughout the hospital with deafening intensity. Emergency lights began flashing, and the building's public address system immediately began broadcasting evacuation instructions. The effect was exactly what Mitchell had predicted: instant chaos and confusion. Sarah pushed the wheelchair out of room 7 and moved as quickly as possible toward the East Wing. The men in suits were momentarily distracted by the fire alarm, looking around in confusion and speaking rapidly into communication devices. Helen was looking bewildered, trying to understand what was happening and whether this was a real emergency or a false alarm. They made it past the nurse's station without being noticed, but as they entered the connecting corridor, Sarah heard shouting behind them. Someone had realized that room 7 was now empty, and the search was intensifying rapidly. Faster, Mitchell urged, though Sarah was already pushing the wheelchair at near dangerous speed through the hospital corridors. They passed startled night shift workers who were beginning to respond to the fire alarm, adding to the general confusion that was providing their cover. The service elevator was at the end of a short hallway that branched off from the main corridor. As they approached, Sarah could see that the elevator doors were closed, and she prayed it would respond quickly to her call. Behind them, she could hear running footsteps and urgent voices as their pursuers realized their targets were mobile and escaping. Sarah hit the elevator call button repeatedly while Mitchell struggled to stand from the wheelchair, preparing for whatever would come next. The elevator seemed to take forever to respond, and the sounds of pursuit were getting closer. "There," Mitchell said, pointing to an emergency staircase about 20 feet from the elevator. "If the elevator doesn't come in the next 10 seconds, we'll have to use the stairs." The thought of helping an injured man navigate hospital emergency stairs while being pursued by armed operatives was terrifying, but Sarah knew they were running out of options. She could hear voices in the main corridor now, and it sounded like the search team was questioning staff members about seeing a nurse with a patient in a wheelchair. With a soft ding that sounded like salvation, the service elevator doors opened. Sarah pushed Mitchell inside and immediately hit the button for the basement level, then pressed the door close button repeatedly, willing the doors to shut before anyone could see them. As the elevator doors closed, Sarah caught a glimpse of a man in a dark suit rounding the corner into their hallway, moving fast and speaking into a radio. The doors sealed shut just as he looked in their direction, and the elevator began its descent to the basement level. "Did he see us?" Sarah asked, breathing heavily from the adrenaline and exertion of their escape. "Possibly," Mitchell replied, checking his injuries to see how the rapid movement had affected his condition. "But even if he did, they don't know which floor we're going to. The basement level has multiple exits, including the parking garage and service tunnels that connect to other buildings." The elevator reached the basement with another soft ding, and the doors opened to reveal a dimly lit corridor lined with hospital service areas, laundry, maintenance, food service, and medical supply storage. It was a part of the hospital that most patients and visitors never saw, a network of functional spaces that kept the hospital running behind the scenes. "Which way to the parking garage?" Sarah asked as she helped Mitchell out of the elevator and back into the wheelchair. His condition seemed stable for the moment, but She could see that the stress and movement were taking a toll on his injured body. Left, then, straight for about 100 yards, Mitchell directed. But first we need to disable the elevator, so they can't follow us immediately. Mitchell produced another small device from his pocket and attached it to the elevator's control panel. Within seconds, the elevator's lights went out, and it became clear that it was no longer functional. "That should buy us a few minutes," he said as Sarah began pushing him toward the parking garage. "They'll have to use the main elevators or find the emergency stairs, both of which will take time and create more opportunities for us to escape." As they moved through the basement corridor, Sarah's mind was spinning with questions and fears about what they were involved in. Less than an hour ago, she had been starting what she thought would be a routine night shift. Now she was helping a wounded Navy SEAL Admiral escape from what appeared to be a sophisticated assassination attempt. "Admiral Mitchell," she said quietly as they approached the parking garage entrance, "I need to understand what's happening here. Why are these people trying to kill you? What kind of operation were you conducting that someone was willing to murder your entire team to stop?" Mitchell was quiet for a moment, apparently weighing how much he could or should tell her. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of secrets and the burden of command decisions that had gone terribly wrong. 3 days ago, I was briefed on intelligence suggesting a major security breach within the Department of Defense, he began. Classified information about special operations missions was being leaked to foreign agents, resulting in compromised operations and American casualties. My team was assigned to investigate and identify the source of the leaks. They reached the parking garage entrance, and Sarah paused to check if the area was clear before proceeding. The garage was dimly lit and appeared empty except for a few cars belonging to hospital night shift workers. "We discovered that the leak was not coming from lower-level personnel as initially suspected," Mitchell continued. "The intelligence being sold included information that was only available to very high-ranking officials within the military and intelligence communities. We were closing in on identifying the specific individuals involved when our position was compromised." Sarah pushed the wheelchair between parked cars, using them for cover while they moved toward what she hoped would be a safe exit. The parking garage had multiple levels and several entrances, which would make it difficult for their pursuers to cover all possible escape routes. "Someone with access to our classified mission briefings informed the people we were investigating that we were onto them," Mitchell explained. "They arranged an ambush that was designed to eliminate my entire team and make it look like we had been killed by enemy forces during a routine operation." "But you survived," Sarah observed, checking behind them for any signs of pursuit. So far, the parking garage remained empty and quiet, but she knew that could change rapidly. "Barely," Mitchell replied grimly, "and only because I was thrown clear when our vehicle hit an improvised explosive device. I managed to reach a safe house and treat my injuries well enough to stay mobile, but I knew I needed proper medical care. I thought using a civilian hospital with a cover identity would be safer than trying to reach a military medical facility." "But they track you here anyway," Sarah said, understanding the implications. "Which means they have access to information about your cover identities and safe house locations." "Exactly," Mitchell confirmed. "Which means the security breach is even more extensive than we initially suspected. These people have access to some of the most classified information in the American intelligence community." They had reached the parking garage exit that led to the street, but as they approached, Sarah could see vehicle headlights approaching the hospital from multiple directions. Several dark SUVs were converging on the building, and it was clear that their pursuers were expanding their search to the surrounding area. "We need a vehicle," Mitchell said, assessing their situation. "And we need to get away from this hospital immediately. They're setting up a perimeter, and soon there won't be any way out." Sarah looked around the parking garage desperately. Most of the cars belonged to hospital staff, and she didn't have access to any of them. Even if she did, taking someone else's vehicle would create additional legal and ethical complications that her mind couldn't fully process in the current crisis. "There," Mitchell said, pointing to an older pickup truck parked near the far wall of the garage. That vehicle has been modified. Look at the antenna array and the reinforced bumper. That belongs to someone in law enforcement or military. Sarah squinted in the dim light and could see that he was right. The pickup truck had several features that suggested it was more than a civilian vehicle. But that also meant it probably had security features that would prevent them from simply breaking in and driving away. Even if you're right about the truck, how are we going to get access to it? Sarah asked. And won't stealing a law enforcement vehicle make this situation even worse? Before Mitchell could answer, they heard the sound of the hospital's fire alarm being shut off, followed by voices echoing through the parking garage. Their pursuers had found a way to the basement level and were beginning to search the garage systematically. Change of plans, Mitchell whispered urgently. We're going to have to leave the hospital on foot and find transportation elsewhere. Help me out of this wheelchair. From here on, we move fast and stay hidden. Sarah helped Admiral Mitchell out of the wheelchair, abandoning the medical equipment they could no longer safely transport. His movements were still labored, and she could see that leaving behind the portable oxygen and for fluids would make their escape more dangerous for his health. But staying in the hospital parking garage was no longer an option. The voices in the parking garage were getting closer, and Sarah could see flashlight beams sweeping between the parked cars as their pursuers conducted a methodical search. These people were clearly experienced in tracking fugitives, and they were not going to give up easily. There's a maintenance exit on the far side of the garage, Mitchell whispered, pointing toward a dimly lit corner where Sarah could barely make out what looked like a service door. It connects to the hospital's utility tunnels, which run beneath the entire medical complex and connect to several other buildings in the area. Moving as quietly as possible while supporting Mitchell's weight, Sarah helped him navigate between the parked cars toward the maintenance exit. Every few steps, they had to stop and crouch behind vehicles as flashlight beams swept past their location. The tension was overwhelming, and Sarah found herself holding her breath for long periods, afraid that even the sound of her breathing might give away their position. As they reached the maintenance door, Sarah discovered it was secured with an electronic lock that required a key card. Her heart sank as she realized they might be trapped in the parking garage after all, but Mitchell was already working on the lock with another of his mysterious devices. Military technology, he whispered again as the lock clicked open with a soft electronic beep. Sometimes it's useful for more than just military operations. They slipped through the maintenance door into a narrow corridor lined with pipes, electrical conduits, and ventilation systems. The air was warm and humid, and the space was barely wide enough for two people to move side by side. Emergency lighting provided just enough illumination to navigate, but the tunnel stretched into darkness in both directions. Which way? Sarah asked, supporting Mitchell as they moved deeper into the tunnel system. Right leads toward the medical office building across the street, Mitchell replied, consulting what looked like a small GPS device. Left goes toward the university campus about a quarter-mile away. The university would give us more options for finding transportation and blending in with civilian populations. They chose the left tunnel and began making their way through the underground passage. The tunnel was obviously designed for maintenance access rather than human travel, and several times they had to duck under low-hanging pipes or step around electrical junction boxes. Mitchell's injuries made the journey even more challenging, but he pushed forward with the determination of someone whose life depended on reaching their destination. Admiral, Sarah said as they paused at a junction where the tunnel split into 3 different directions, I need to know more about what we're dealing with. If these people are willing to kill federal agents and blow up hospitals to cover their tracks, what makes you think we can stay ahead of them? Mitchell leaned against the tunnel wall, breathing heavily from the exertion of their underground journey. Despite her medical treatment, his injuries were clearly affecting his stamina and mobility. Sarah realized that their current pace was not sustainable, and they would need to find a safe place for him to rest and recover soon. The people hunting us are not just criminals or foreign agents, Mitchell explained. They represent a conspiracy that involves high-ranking officials within our own government and military. They have access to classified surveillance systems, federal databases, and coordination with local law enforcement. Under normal circumstances, it would be nearly impossible to evade them. Then, how are we supposed to survive this? Sarah asked, feeling increasingly overwhelmed by the scope of what they were facing. Because I have something they want more than they want me dead, Mitchell replied. During our investigation, we discovered not just who was selling classified information, but what specific intelligence was being sold and to which foreign governments. That information is stored on encrypted devices that I managed to secure before the ambush. Mitchell showed Sarah a small device that looked like a modified smartphone. This contains evidence that could expose the entire conspiracy and identify every person involved, from low-level informants to cabinet-level officials. As long as I have this information, they can't simply kill me and walk away. They need to recover this device and ensure that the evidence never sees the light of day. Sarah began to understand the bigger picture. So we're not just running for our lives. We're carrying information that could prevent future attacks and save other people's lives. Exactly, Mitchell confirmed. But getting this information to the right people is going to be extremely difficult. We can't trust normal law enforcement channels because we don't know how far the conspiracy reaches. We can't contact my military superiors because someone with high-level access arranged the ambush that killed my team. They resumed moving through the tunnel system, following signs that indicated they were approaching the university campus. Sarah's nursing training helped her monitor Mitchell's condition as they traveled, and she could see that his breathing was becoming more labored and his movements less coordinated. They needed to find a safe place to rest soon, or his injuries might become life-threatening again. There, Mitchell said, pointing to a maintenance ladder that led upward toward what appeared to be a surface access point. That should bring us up somewhere on the university campus. We'll have better options for transportation and communication from there. Climbing the ladder was extremely difficult for Mitchell in his injured condition, and Sarah had to help support his weight while ensuring he didn't fall. When they finally reached the top, they found themselves in a small maintenance building behind the university's engineering complex. Through the windows, they could see the campus quad and several academic buildings, all of which appeared quiet and empty in the early morning hours. "What time is it?" Sarah asked, realizing she had lost track of time during their underground journey. Mitchell checked his watch. Almost 3 in the morning. Most of the campus will be deserted except for security patrols and a few students studying late in the library. We should be able to move around without attracting too much attention. They left the maintenance building and began walking across the campus, sticking to pathways that were well lit, but avoiding areas where they might encounter security cameras or patrol routes. Mitchell was moving more slowly now, and Sarah could see that he was fighting to stay conscious as his body struggled to cope with his injuries and the stress of their escape. "We need to get you proper medical attention soon," Sarah said as they approached the university library, which appeared to have lights on and possibly some late-night activity. "Not yet," Mitchell replied firmly. "First, we need to establish secure communication with someone who can help us. I have contacts in the intelligence community who are not part of this conspiracy, but reaching them safely is going to require careful planning." They entered the university library through a side entrance that was accessible to students with valid identification cards. Mitchell produced what appeared to be a fake student ID that allowed them to enter without triggering any alarms. Inside, they found a computer lab that was empty except for one student who was sleeping at a desk in the far corner. "I need to access a secure communication system," Mitchell explained as he sat down at one of the computers. "This will take a few minutes, and we need to be prepared to leave quickly if anyone comes looking for us." While Mitchell worked at the computer, Sarah kept watch for any signs of security patrols or other people who might pose a threat. The library felt safe and isolated, but she knew that their pursuers were probably expanding their search to the entire area around the hospital. "Sarah," Mitchell said after several minutes of typing, "I need you to understand something important. The people we're dealing with have resources and connections that go far beyond what most people can imagine. They have access to federal surveillance systems, military databases, and coordination with agencies that most citizens don't even know exist. What are you trying to tell me? Sarah asked, moving closer to the computer where Mitchell was working. I'm telling you that helping me puts you in extreme danger, Mitchell explained. These people will not hesitate to kill you to protect their conspiracy. If you want to walk away now, I'll understand. You can go back to the hospital, report that your patient disappeared, and try to return to your normal life. Sarah considered his offer for a moment. Everything about this situation was terrifying and completely beyond her experience as a nurse. She had signed up to help people heal from injuries and illnesses, not to become involved in military conspiracies and assassination attempts. But as she looked at Mitchell, struggling to stay conscious while trying to expose a conspiracy that had already cost the lives of his entire team, she realized that walking away was not really an option. He was her patient, and he needed her help to survive. More importantly, the information he carried could prevent future attacks and save other innocent lives. I'm staying, Sarah said firmly. Tell me what we need to do. Mitchell smiled for the first time since she had met him. Thank you, he said simply. I've established contact with someone who can help us, but we need to reach a secure location where we can transfer this information safely. It's going to be dangerous, and we'll need to evade surveillance systems that are probably already being activated to track us. Where do we need to go? Sarah asked. There's a federal courthouse about 10 miles from here, Mitchell explained. It has security systems and communication equipment that are isolated from the normal government networks that may be compromised. If we can reach the courthouse, I can transfer this information to people who are definitely not part of the conspiracy. Sarah looked out the library windows toward the campus parking areas. How do we get there? We don't have a vehicle, and calling a taxi would leave an electronic trail that they could follow. The university has a motor pool for faculty and staff vehicles, Mitchell said. Some of those vehicles are equipped with emergency communication systems that I might be able to use to contact additional help. If we can access one of those vehicles, we'll have transportation and a way to call for backup. They left the library and made their way toward the university's administrative complex, where the motor pool was located. The campus was completely quiet now, and their footsteps seemed unnaturally loud on the concrete pathways. Every shadow could conceal a threat, and every sound made Sarah's heart race with anxiety. As they approached the motor pool, they saw several university vehicles parked in a secured lot behind a chain-link fence. The vehicles included maintenance trucks, security patrol cars, and what appeared to be an emergency response vehicle equipped with additional communication equipment. That one, Mitchell said, pointing to the emergency response vehicle. It'll have the communication systems we need, and it's designed to be mobile in crisis situations. Mitchell produced another electronic device and began working on the fence's security system. Within moments, the gate clicked open, and they were able to access the vehicle lot. Getting into the emergency response vehicle took longer, but eventually Mitchell's technological resources overcame the security systems. I feel like I should point out that we're now adding vehicle theft to our list of crimes, Sarah said as they climbed into the stolen university truck. Under normal circumstances, I would agree with you, Mitchell replied as he started the engine. But given that we're trying to expose a conspiracy that threatens national security, I think we can justify borrowing a university vehicle. As they drove away from the campus toward the federal courthouse, Sarah noticed that Mitchell's condition was continuing to deteriorate. His breathing was becoming more labored, and she could see that he was struggling to maintain concentration while driving. Let me drive, she suggested. You need to focus on staying conscious and keeping your injuries stable. They switched positions, and Sarah took control of the vehicle while Mitchell used the communication equipment to try to establish contact with his allies in the intelligence community. As they drove through the empty streets, Sarah couldn't help but wonder what they would find when they reached the courthouse, and whether they would be able to complete their mission before the people hunting them caught up with them. Sarah gripped the steering wheel tightly as she navigated the empty streets toward the federal courthouse, constantly checking her mirrors for signs of pursuit. Beside her, Admiral Mitchell worked frantically with the communication equipment, tried to establish secure contact with his allies while fighting to stay conscious as his injuries continued to take their toll. "I've got partial contact with Deputy Director Harrison at the Defense Intelligence Agency," Mitchell reported, his voice strained with pain and exhaustion. "He's one of the few people I'm certain is not compromised, but the communication is intermittent. The people hunting us may be jamming certain frequencies to prevent us from calling for help." Sarah could see the federal courthouse building ahead, its imposing stone facade illuminated by security lighting. The building looked like a fortress, which gave her some hope that they might finally reach a safe location. But as they approached, she noticed something that made her stomach clench with fear. "Admiral," she said quietly, pointing toward the courthouse steps, "look at those vehicles." Parked around the courthouse perimeter were several black SUVs, identical to the ones they had seen converging on the hospital. Men in dark suits were positioned at strategic locations around the building, and it was clear that their pursuers had anticipated their destination and arrived first. "They're already here," Mitchell confirmed grimly. "Someone leaked our intended destination, or they correctly anticipated that the courthouse would be our logical choice for a secure location." Sarah pulled over several blocks away from the courthouse, parking behind a commercial building where their vehicle would be less visible. They needed time to assess the situation and develop a new plan, but time was something they had very little of. "How could they have known where we were going?" Sarah asked. "You only established contact with your ally a few minutes ago." Mitchell's expression darkened as he considered the implications. Either they intercepted our communication, which would require extremely sophisticated surveillance technology, or Deputy Director Harrison is not as trustworthy as I believed. Both possibilities suggest that this conspiracy is even more extensive than we realized. Sarah felt a growing sense of despair as she realized the scope of what they were facing. If they couldn't trust high-ranking intelligence officials, and if their pursuers could anticipate their moves and intercept their communications, how were they supposed to get the crucial evidence to anyone who could act on it? "What are our options now?" she asked, checking Mitchell's condition while they tried to formulate a new strategy. His pulse was weak and irregular, and his breathing was becoming increasingly shallow. They were running out of time in more ways than one. "There's one more possibility," Mitchell said after a long pause. "It's extremely dangerous, but it might be our only chance to get this information to people who can use it effectively." "Tell me," Sarah said, though she was afraid of what he might propose. "There's a journalist named Rebecca Torres who has been investigating government corruption and intelligence community scandals for the past several years," Mitchell explained. "She has a reputation for protecting her sources and for publishing stories that expose high-level corruption, even when it puts her own life in danger." Sarah considered this option. A journalist? Wouldn't that put the information at risk of being dismissed as unverified claims or conspiracy theories? "Not if we can provide her with the encrypted evidence files and help her verify their authenticity," Mitchell replied. "She has contacts within the intelligence community who can confirm that the information is legitimate. More importantly, once this information becomes public, it will be much harder for the conspiracy to silence everyone who knows about it. Where will we find this journalist? And how do we know she's not part of the conspiracy herself?" Mitchell was working with his communication equipment again, trying to access information about Rebecca Torres's current location. She's based in Washington, but she travels frequently to investigate stories. According to her public schedule, she's supposed to be in this city tonight, covering a story about defense contractor fraud. "That's a coincidence that makes me nervous," Sarah observed. "What are the odds that an investigative journalist who specializes in government corruption just happens to be in the same city where we're trying to expose a major conspiracy?" "You're right to be suspicious," Mitchell agreed. "But at this point, we don't have many alternatives. The people hunting us have demonstrated that they can intercept our communications, anticipate our movements, and coordinate with local law enforcement. We need someone with the resources and connections to make this information public quickly before they can eliminate all the witnesses." Sarah made a decision that surprised her with its decisiveness. "Then, let's find this journalist. But We need to be extremely careful about how we approach her. If she's legitimate, we need to protect her from becoming another target. If she's part of the conspiracy, we need to be prepared to escape quickly. Mitchell used the vehicle's communication system to research Rebecca Torres's current location. According to publicly available information, she was staying at a downtown hotel while investigating her current story. The hotel was about 15 minutes away from their current location, but getting there would require traveling through the downtown area where their pursuers would likely have the highest concentration of surveillance resources. Before we go anywhere, Sarah said firmly, I need to do something about your medical condition. You're getting worse, and if you collapse, we won't be able to complete this mission regardless of whether we find help. Sarah examined Mitchell's injuries using the vehicle's emergency medical supplies. The shrapnel wounds had begun bleeding again during their escape from the hospital, and his vital signs indicated that he was going into shock from blood loss and physical stress. I can stabilize you temporarily, she said as she prepared medical supplies, but you need proper surgical treatment soon, or these injuries are going to become life-threatening. Do what you can, Mitchell replied weakly. Getting this information to the right people is more important than my survival. Too many good people have already died because of this conspiracy. Sarah worked quickly to clean and rebandage Mitchell's wounds, using medical supplies from the emergency vehicle to provide more comprehensive treatment than had been possible at the hospital. She also established a new four-line and administered medications to help stabilize his blood pressure and manage his pain. Better? She asked as she finished the emergency medical treatment. Much better, Mitchell confirmed, and Sarah could see that her treatment had indeed improved his condition significantly. You have a gift for emergency medicine. Have you ever considered specializing in trauma care? If we survive this, I might consider a lot of career changes, Sarah replied as she helped him into a more comfortable position. Right now, let's focus on reaching this journalist and transferring your evidence before anyone else has to die. They resumed their journey toward the downtown hotel, taking indirect routes and avoiding main streets where surveillance cameras would be most concentrated. Sarah had never thought about how many ways a person's movements could be tracked in a modern city, but their current situation was making her acutely aware of the extensive surveillance infrastructure that surrounded everyday life. As they approached the hotel district, they began to see more signs of their pursuers' presence. Additional black SUVs were positioned at key intersections, and men in suits were visible near several major hotels. It was clear that their enemies were conducting a systematic search of the area, probably checking every location where someone might seek help or shelter. They're covering all the major hotels, Sarah observed as they drove past the building where Rebecca Torres was supposedly staying. How are we going to make contact with her without being detected? We need to get a message to her without exposing our location, Mitchell said, working with his communication equipment again. If I can access the hotel's internal communication system, I might be able to leave a message that appears to come from a routine source. Mitchell managed to hack into the hotel's phone system and leave a voicemail message for Rebecca Torres that identified him only as a source with information about defense contractor fraud, the story she was already investigating. The message suggested a meeting at a nearby coffee shop that would be relatively public but not obviously connected to their actual mission. Now we wait and see if she responds, Mitchell said as they found a parking location with a clear view of the coffee shop where they had proposed to meet. 20 minutes later, they saw a woman matching Rebecca Torres' description enter the coffee shop and order a drink while looking around cautiously. She appeared to be alone, but Sarah noticed that she was carrying a bag that could contain recording equipment and that she was sitting in a location with clear sight lines to all the entrances. She looks like someone who's experienced in meeting confidential sources, Sarah observed. That's either a good sign that she's legitimate or a bad sign that she's working with intelligence agencies. Only one way to find out, Mitchell said as he prepared to leave the vehicle. If this goes badly, drive away immediately and try to reach law enforcement outside the city. Don't worry about me. We're in this together, Sarah replied firmly. If you're going into that coffee shop, I'm going with you. We'll face whatever happens together. They entered the coffee shop separately, with Sarah entering first to assess the situation and Mitchell following a few minutes later. Rebecca Torres was an attractive woman in her 30s with an alert, intelligent expression and the kind of confident bearing that suggested extensive experience in dealing with dangerous situations. Mitchell approached her table directly, while Sarah positioned herself at the counter where she could watch for threats and provide backup if needed. The conversation would determine whether they had finally found someone who could help them or whether they had walked into another trap. "Miss Torres," Mitchell said quietly as he sat down across from her, "thank you for meeting with me on such short notice. I have information about defense contractor fraud that goes far beyond what you're currently investigating." Rebecca Torres studied him carefully, and Sarah could see her taking in details about his appearance, injuries, and general demeanor. After a moment, she spoke in a voice that was professional but cautious. "Mr. Wilson, I assume," she said, using the cover identity he had mentioned in his message. "You look like someone who has been through significant trauma recently. Are you in immediate danger?" "Yes to both questions," Mitchell replied honestly. "And the information I have involves a conspiracy that includes high-ranking government officials, foreign intelligence operations, and the murder of federal agents. If you're willing to help expose this conspiracy, it could be the biggest story of your career. But it will also put your life in serious danger." Rebecca Torres leaned forward, her journalist's instincts clearly engaged by the magnitude of what Mitchell was describing. "Show me what you have," she said simply. Rebecca Torres examined the encrypted device that Admiral Mitchell placed on the coffee shop table between them, her experienced eyes taking in both the sophisticated technology and the desperate condition of the man who had brought it to her. Sarah watched nervously from her position at the counter, scanning the coffee shop's windows and entrance for any signs that their pursuers had found them. This device contains classified intelligence files that document a conspiracy involving the sale of military secrets to foreign governments, Mitchell explained in a low voice, leaning across the table to ensure their conversation couldn't be overheard. "The conspiracy includes officials at the highest levels of the Defense Department and intelligence community." Rebecca Torres nodded slowly, her journalistic instincts clearly engaged. "How do I know this information is authentic? And, more importantly, how do I know you're who you claim to be?" Mitchell carefully opened his shirt to reveal the military tattoo that had convinced Sarah of his identity hours earlier. Additionally, he showed Rebecca a series of authentication codes and personal details that only someone with his level of security clearance would know. "I'm Admiral James Mitchell, United States Navy SEALs, Special Operations Command," he said quietly. 3 days ago, my team was ambushed and killed while investigating intelligence leaks. I'm the only survivor, and the people responsible are using government resources to hunt me down and eliminate the evidence." Rebecca examined the authentication information carefully, and Sarah could see her making mental notes about details that would allow her to verify Mitchell's identity through her own sources later. "Assuming you're telling the truth," Rebecca said carefully, "why come to me instead of going through official military or intelligence channels?" "Because we have reason to believe the conspiracy includes people within those official channels," Sarah interjected, moving closer to their table while continuing to watch for threats. "They've demonstrated the ability to track Admiral Mitchell's movements, intercept his communications, and coordinate with local law enforcement." Rebecca Torres looked at Sarah with new interest. "And you are?" "Sarah Martinez, registered nurse at St. Mary's General Hospital," Sarah replied. "I was treating Admiral Mitchell when armed men stormed the hospital looking for him. Everything I thought I knew about my normal life changed about 4 hours ago." The journalist's expression showed both sympathy and professional curiosity. A nurse gets caught up in a military conspiracy. That's either an incredible coincidence, or these people are willing to eliminate anyone who might have information about Admiral Mitchell's condition and location. The second option, Mitchell confirmed grimly. "They've already demonstrated that they're willing to kill federal agents and innocent civilians to protect their operation. Helping us puts you in extreme danger, but you may be our only chance to expose this conspiracy before they eliminate all the witnesses." Rebecca Torres was quiet for a long moment, apparently weighing the risks against the potential impact of the story. When she spoke again, her voice carried the determination of someone who had built her career on exposing difficult truths. "I need to verify some of this information before I can commit to publishing anything," she said. "But I can tell you that your story fits with some disturbing patterns I've been investigating in my defense contractor fraud research. There have been too many intelligence failures and compromised operations recently for it to be coincidental." Sarah felt a surge of hope as she realized that they might finally have found someone who could help them. But her optimism was immediately tempered by the sight of familiar black SUVs pulling into the parking lot outside the coffee shop. "We have company," Sarah said urgently, moving quickly back to Mitchell and Rebecca's table. "Multiple vehicles, coordinated arrival. We need to leave immediately." Mitchell struggled to stand, his injuries clearly affecting his mobility despite Sarah's medical treatment. Rebecca Torres immediately understood the seriousness of the situation and began gathering her equipment while scanning the coffee shop for alternative exits. "Back exit through the kitchen," Rebecca said, pointing toward the rear of the coffee shop. "I know the layout of this building because I've used it for confidential meetings before." They moved quickly toward the kitchen area, with Sarah supporting Mitchell while Rebecca led the way. Behind them, they could see men in dark suits entering the coffee shop and beginning to question the staff about recent customers. The kitchen staff looked surprised, but didn't interfere as the three fugitives passed through their work area toward the building's rear exit. Sarah realized that Rebecca Torres must have established some kind of arrangement with the coffee shop's management that allowed her to use the building for meeting confidential sources. "My car is parked 2 blocks away," Rebecca said as they exited into an alley behind the coffee shop. "It's not connected to my official identity, so it should be safe for transportation." They made their way through a series of alleys and side streets, avoiding main roads where surveillance cameras and patrol vehicles would be most concentrated. Mitchell's condition was deteriorating again from the physical stress of their continued escape, and Sarah knew they needed to find a secure location where she could provide more comprehensive medical treatment. "Where can we go that's safe?" Sarah asked as they reached Rebecca's vehicle, a nondescript sedan that was indeed unmarked and appeared to have been modified for surveillance work. "I have a safe house about 20 minutes from here," Rebecca replied as she started the engine. "It's designed for situations where journalists need to protect themselves and their sources from retaliation. The location is not connected to my official identity, and it has secure communication equipment that can't be easily intercepted." As they drove toward Rebecca's safe house, Mitchell used the encrypted device to begin transferring files to Rebecca's secure computer system. The process was complex, requiring multiple authentication steps and encryption protocols that would ensure the information couldn't be altered or falsified. "This is incredible," Rebecca said as she began reviewing the transferred files. "These documents show that classified intelligence about special operations missions was being sold to at least 3 different foreign governments. The financial records alone prove that millions of dollars changed hands." "Look at the personnel files," Mitchell suggested weakly, his voice showing the strain of his injuries. "The conspiracy includes 2 deputy directors within the Defense Intelligence Agency, at least 1 general within Special Operations Command, and several high-ranking officials within the Department of Homeland Security." Sarah reviewed Mitchell's vital signs while he worked with Rebecca to transfer the critical evidence files. His blood pressure was dropping, and his pulse was becoming increasingly irregular. They were running out of time for him to complete this mission before his injuries became life-threatening. "How long will it take you to verify this information and publish the story?" Sarah asked Rebecca as they approached the safe house. "With documentation this comprehensive, I can't have verification from my sources within a few hours," Rebecca replied. "Publishing will take longer because I'll need to coordinate with my editors and legal team, but we can have preliminary information online within 6 hours." "That might not be fast enough," Mitchell said, checking his communication device for messages from their pursuers. "They're expanding their search area and bringing in additional resources. Federal agencies are being told that we're dangerous fugitives who pose a threat to national security. They arrived at Rebecca's safe house, which appeared to be an ordinary suburban home, but was equipped with sophisticated security systems and communication equipment. Rebecca helped them inside while constantly checking for signs that they had been followed or that their location had been compromised. "Admiral Mitchell," Rebecca said as she activated her secure communication systems, "I need you to record a detailed statement about everything that happened to your team and how you obtained this evidence. If something happens to you before this story can be published, your recorded testimony might be the only way to ensure the truth comes out." Mitchell agreed to record his statement, but Sarah could see that his condition was continuing to deteriorate. She used Rebecca's medical supplies to provide additional treatment, but without proper surgical intervention, his injuries were going to become critical soon. "There's something else," Mitchell said as he prepared to record his statement. The intelligence that was being sold didn't just compromise military operations. It included information about domestic surveillance programs and federal law enforcement operations. The people involved in this conspiracy have been selling information that has resulted in the deaths of federal agents, military personnel, and confidential informants. Rebecca's expression showed both horror and determination as she realized the full scope of the story she was about to publish. "How many people have died because of this conspiracy?" "At least 37 that we were able to document," Mitchell replied. "But the actual number is probably much higher because some of the compromised operations involve classified activities that wouldn't be publicly reported." As Mitchell began recording his detailed statement, Sarah monitored the safe house's security systems and Rebecca's communication equipment for any signs that their location had been discovered. The technology was impressive, but she knew that their pursuers had already demonstrated the ability to overcome sophisticated security systems. "I'm getting reports from my sources within the intelligence community," Rebecca said, checking her secure communications. "There's been a massive mobilization of federal resources to search for you. They're telling everyone that you're a rogue agent who has stolen classified information and poses a threat to national security, which means they're preparing to escalate their response," Mitchell observed. "If they can't capture us quietly, they'll arrange for us to be killed during an apparent law enforcement operation, then claim that we were dangerous criminals who were resisting arrest." Sarah felt a new wave of fear as she realized that their pursuers were preparing to use the full resources of the federal government against them. Even if Rebecca could publish the story exposing the conspiracy, it might be too late to save their lives. "How much longer do you need to finish the evidence transfer?" Sarah asked, checking Mitchell's condition again. His vital signs were becoming increasingly unstable, and she knew he didn't have much time left without proper medical care. "Almost finished," Mitchell replied, working with the last of the encrypted files. "Once this transfer is complete, Rebecca will have everything she needs to expose the entire conspiracy. The evidence is comprehensive enough that they won't be able to dismiss it or cover it up." Rebecca was already working with her editors and sources to begin the verification process. Her professional network within the intelligence community was confirming details about the conspiracy and providing additional context that would make the story impossible to ignore or suppress. "Admiral," Rebecca said as she finished her preliminary review of the evidence, "this story is going to change everything. The people involved in this conspiracy will face criminal charges, and there will probably be congressional investigations that last for years. You've done something incredibly brave and important." Mitchell smiled weakly as he completed the evidence transfer. "My team died trying to expose this conspiracy. If their sacrifice can prevent future attacks and save other lives, then it was worth it." Suddenly, the safe house's security alarms began sounding, indicating that armed individuals were approaching the building from multiple directions. Rebecca immediately began emergency procedures to protect her sources and secure her communication equipment, while Sarah helped Mitchell prepare for what might be their final confrontation with the people who had been hunting them. "How much time do we have?" Sarah asked as Rebecca checked the security monitors. "Not long," Rebecca replied grimly, "but the story is already being uploaded to secure servers. Even if they stop us here, the information will still be published. The truth will come out. As armed men surrounded the safe house and began demanding their surrender, Sarah realized that their desperate flight had accomplished its most important objective. The evidence that could expose the entire conspiracy was now in the hands of someone who had the resources and determination to make it public. Whatever happened next, the truth would survive, and the people responsible for the deaths of Mitchell's team would finally face justice. Sometimes, Sarah reflected as she prepared to face an uncertain future. The smallest acts of courage can change the course of history.